Imagine a company that is hitting absolute record profits. Like the stock is soaring, the quarterly earnings are just outperforming every single expectation on Wall Street.
The absolute dream scenario.
Right. And the CEO has just landed on the cover of some major business magazine. So by every modern measurable metric we have, this is a massive, unmitigated success story.
On paper, yeah. It looks flawless.
Exactly, on paper. But then behind closed doors, in the actual hallways of this company, there is a totally different reality playing out.
Yeah, the stuff that doesn't make the magazine cover.
Right. The turnover rate is quietly astronomical. The middle managers are completely burned out, just, operating on a diet of pure cortisol.
Running on empty.
Exactly. And innovation has secretly flatlined because everyone is terrified of making a single mistake.
Oh, yeah, that fear culture.
Right. So the entire ecosystem is just like one bad quarter away from a complete psychological collapse. And the question we have to ask is, why does that happen?
It's a huge question.
Like, why do we see these brilliant, charismatic leaders build what looks like a rocket ship, only to realize they've actually built a pressure cooker that is going to, explode the second they leave the room?
Well, that paradox is arguably the most common and honestly the most misunderstood dynamic in modern organizational life.
Really? The most misunderstood.
Oh, absolutely. Because we tend to diagnose that situation as a structural failure or maybe like a culture mismatch. Or we just write it off as the inevitable cost of high-speed growth, right?
Like, oh, it's just growing pains.
Exactly. But if we peel back the layers, the root cause is almost always a fundamental misunderstanding of what power actually is.
Oh, wait, how so?
Well, we operate under this collective illusion that power is a tool for personal extraction, rather than a trust that has just been temporarily handed over.
Okay, let's unpack that, because we are diving into a really profound reframing of leadership today.
We really are.
And I want to set the guardrails right from the jump for you listening at home. We are not doing a typical business school case study today.
No, definitely not.
We are not talking about, how to optimize your calendar or the best way to run a Monday morning stand-up or how to inspire your sales team to hit their Q3 quotas. We are doing a deep dive into a manuscript called Steward Leadership, a deep dive into how power is held in trust.
Right. It's a heavy text, but so important.
It is. So our mission today is exploring the moral meaning of power. The core idea we are examining is the difference between possessing power as an owner versus holding power as a steward.
Which, that fundamentally alters the way a leader views their own identity.
Truly.
The central claim we are exploring today is that a true steward leader might hold massive, decisive, consequential authority. They aren't powerless or passive.
Right. They aren't just sitting back.
Exactly. But they make a highly disciplined, conscious choice not to treat that authority as their personal property.
Okay, so it's a choice.
It's a daily choice. Stewardship is the rigorous refusal to turn an office into an identity. It's the refusal to let success mutate into an entitlement, to just consume the people around you.
I think about it like real estate, which it might sound weird, but stick with me for a second.
Okay, I'm listening.
So if you buy a house, you own it outright, right? Like you can gut the kitchen, you can paint the historic brick neon green.
Yeah, exactly. Put your initials on the gate.
Right. If you want to bulldoze the whole thing and build a monument to yourself, you can, because it's yours.
It's your property to destroy if you want to.
Exactly. But imagine instead you are appointed as the temporary custodian of a historic landmark.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Right. You hold the keys, you have total authority over the daily upkeep, the staffing, the budget. But, deep in your bones, you don't own the history of that building, and you do not own its future. You are just holding it in trust.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Because a custodian is answerable to something larger than their own preferences.
Right.
If you are the owner, your only metric of success is your own satisfaction. But if you are a steward, your metric is the condition of the thing you are guarding.
The condition of the thing itself.
Yes. You are answerable for how the power is used, what fragile things you manage to preserve, who is actually being served by the institution, and crucially, what you leave behind when your tenure is over.
Wow.
It demands the intense commitment of an owner, but pairs it with the profound humility of knowing you are, entirely replaceable.
And if I'm listening to this, maybe I'm thinking, well, I'm not a CEO, right? I'm a mid-level project manager.
Right, or I'm just the head of a household.
Exactly. Or I'm running a volunteer committee in my neighborhood, but this applies universally, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because
Right.
anytime someone relies on you, you're holding power.
Yeah, and understanding this difference between possession and stewardship, it feels like the ultimate skeleton key for decoding why certain teams thrive for decades, while others just, collapse into pure toxicity.
It really is the dividing line.
So let's start at the very inception of leadership, like the very first interaction you have when you take on a new role.
Well, the best place to anchor this is with Charles Feltman's definition of trust from our source text.
Okay, what does Feltman say?
He describes trust as choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else.
Vulnerable to the actions of someone else.
Exactly. That right there is the threshold. Because leadership does not begin with a grand vision or some bold strategy. It begins with entrusted vulnerability.
Wait, really? Not a vision?
Nope. When you accept a title or a role, the people under you are suddenly made vulnerable. Their daily peace of mind, their psychological safety, their career trajectory.
And often their actual livelihood.
Right. All of that is now exposed to your decisions.
Entrusted vulnerability. Man, it totally flips the script. Usually when someone gets promoted, the narrative is all about their achievement.
Oh, 100%. It's a victory lap.
Yeah.
It's like, look at what I earned. Look at my new reach. We almost never frame a promotion as, look at how much vulnerability I am now responsible for carrying.
And because we don't frame it that way, the most common, fundamental mistake of leadership happens almost immediately.
Which is what?
It is this quiet, totally imperceptible psychological transfer where entrusted authority mutates into personal possession. The leader stops seeing the people as a trust they're holding and starts seeing them as an extension of their own machinery.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little bit here.
Sure, go ahead.
If you look at the landscape of business or politics, leadership is inherently about taking control, right?
That's the popular narrative.
I mean, we literally applaud the turnaround CEO.
Yeah.
The board hires someone specifically to come in, clean house, break the old habits, and bend the company to their will to save it from bankruptcy.
Right.
If you don't take total ownership of the problem, how can you possibly lead the solution? Isn't taking ownership the first thing we teach young professionals? So here's where it gets really interesting. There is a vital distinction between taking ownership of a responsibility and taking ownership of an institution and its people.
Okay, clarify that for me.
We are deeply conditioned to admire the visible, aggressive features of authority. We love a savior narrative.
We really do. The hero riding in on a white horse.
Exactly. We want the visionary leader standing at the center of the storm, directing events from a position of absolute strength. But much of what passes for brilliant leadership in those turnaround scenarios is actually deeply corrosive in the long run.
Why is it corrosive if it works?
Because it operates on the belief that the power belongs to the person holding it. They might save the quarterly earnings, but they bankrupt the culture's capacity to function independently.
Because they make the institution completely dependent on their own genius.
Yes.
It's like putting a patient on life support where the leader is the machine. Like the patient is technically alive, but they can't breathe on their own anymore.
That is a perfect analogy. The dependency becomes the point.
Okay, so if taking possessive control is the wrong reflex, how does a steward leader actually orient themselves when they take charge? Like, what's the first step?
There is a brilliant framework from Peter Block in the text that addresses this perfectly.
Okay.
He suggests that questions are actually far more transforming than answers.
Questions over answers.
Right. When a possessive leader walks into a new role, their internal monologue is a set of specific questions. What can I do with this power? How can I maximize my impact? How can I make this department serve my overarching career goals?
So it's all me.
Yeah.
The power is viewed purely as an instrument for self-expansion.
Exactly. But the steward leader walks into that exact same room and asks a radically different set of questions.
Like what?
They ask, what exactly have been placed in my hands? What is required of me to ensure this flourishes? What are the limits of my authority here?
What are the limits? Wow, that implies that power isn't just a hammer you swing to build your own house. It's a test.
It is entirely a test. It is a test of self-limitation.
Self-limitation.
Yeah. Can you hold real consequential power? Can you make the hard choices, fire the underperformer, reallocate the budget without turning the office into a mirror that just reflects your own ego back to you?
Measuring a leader by their capacity for self-limitation is wild. It goes against like every instinct we have in the corporate world.
It really does.
We measure reach, we measure follower count, market share, the sheer volume of influence. But measuring someone by what they intentionally choose not to control, that requires a totally different psychological makeup.
It requires an incredible amount of maturity.
Which brings up a really obvious question for me. If this steward approach is so healthy, why do so many incredibly talented, well-intentioned people start out wanting to be stewards and then, like 5 years later, they are total tyrants?
Yeah, that drift is so common.
Because they don't start out wanting to be villains.
No one wakes up and decides to become a tyrant. The mutation happens because of the psychological temptations of power.
Okay, break that down for me.
Henri Nouwen has a profound observation on this in the manuscript. He wrote that power offers an easy substitute for the hard task of love.
Wait, power is a substitute for love. I need to sit with that for a second. In a corporate or organizational context, what does love actually mean? We aren't talking about romance here.
Right, no. In this context, love means true active care.
Active care.
Yes, it means patience. It means cultivating the potential in someone else, creating space for them to learn, absorbing their early failures, and doing the slow, grinding work of building mutual trust.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. It takes an immense amount of time and emotional regulation. Power, on the other hand, is the ultimate shortcut.
The shortcut. Because it bypasses all of that friction.
Exactly.
I'll be totally honest, I'm so guilty of this.
Oh, we all are.
Just a few weeks ago, I was working with a junior team member on a massive presentation, and they just weren't getting the formatting right. The narrative flow was totally off.
Yeah, I've been there.
I tried explaining it twice, and I could literally feel my blood pressure rising because we had a strict deadline.
The clock is ticking.
Right. And it was so much faster and honestly so much less emotionally taxing to just say, you know what, send me the file. I'll just do it.
The classic override.
Exactly. I took the mouse, pushed them aside metaphorically, and finished it in 20 minutes. And in the moment, it felt like efficient leadership. I saved the day.
But did you?
Well, hearing this, I realized I just used power as an anxiety relief valve.
That is the perfect microcosm of the silent trap. You use power to secure immediate relief. Imposing quiet is always easier than generating actual peace.
Imposing quiet. Wow.
You can force a task to be completed without creating any trust, and you can secure total compliance without fostering a single ounce of maturity in your team.
I really felt effective because the deck was finished. But what happened to the junior employee? They were left diminished.
They were reminded of their dependency on you, and inwardly, they likely withdrew a little bit of their own initiative.
They did. The next time we had a project, they didn't even try to outline it first. They just waited for my instructions. I had successfully engineered my own indispensability, which felt good to my ego, but actually created a bottleneck for the entire team.
And when you scale that dynamic up to a CEO or a political leader, the damage is exponential.
I can imagine.
The relief of power calms the ego in the short term, but stewardship requires you to actively discipline your ego. And what makes this trap so incredibly seductive is what the text calls the moral fog of success.
The moral fog. Because the outcomes sanitize the behavior.
Precisely. If a leader generates highly visible short-term wins, like if the stock is up, if the project ships early, if the public relations campaign goes viral, the surrounding ecosystem will almost always give them a free pass on their methodology.
Yeah, nobody argues with profits.
Right. Boards and shareholders rarely want to examine the soul of the person producing the golden eggs.
And what about the people working for them?
Followers, ironically, often prefer a possessive leader because an aggressive, dominant figure makes them feel protected, and it absolves them of having to make hard decisions themselves.
That makes sense. It's easier to just follow orders than to share the burden of discernment.
So deep anti-stewardship flourishes, but it's completely camouflaged under the banner of excellence.
That is a terrifying thought. You can be rotting the core of an institution while winning awards for your leadership.
It happens every day.
But we need to make a massive clarification right here, because when we use words like love, care, patience, and not dominating, there is a huge risk that someone listening to us right now thinks stewardship just means being a pushover.
Oh yeah, we have to clear that up.
Like, to be a steward leader, you just have to be endlessly nice, validate everyone's feelings, and never make anyone uncomfortable.
It is crucial to dismantle that assumption entirely. Stewardship is absolutely not niceness.
Not niceness at all.
Not at all. In fact, Niceness is often a form of disguised selfishness.
Whoa, niceness is selfish. How?
Because niceness avoids rupture at all costs, simply because the leader desperately wants to be liked in the present moment.
Ah, so it's about the leader's comfort.
Exactly. A nice leader will let a toxic employee stay on the team because firing them would require a really uncomfortable conversation. Niceness confuses verbal affirmation with actual care.
So what does actual care look like if it isn't just keeping the peace?
True care stewardship understands that long-term health frequently requires immediate painful rupture. It is the hard love of saying no.
Saying no is tough.
It is. But a steward leader must be capable of dismissing people who are poisoning the culture. They have to enforce rigid standards.
They can't be afraid of conflict.
Right. They must be willing to make incredibly unpopular decisions that anger the majority in the short term, specifically to protect the mission in the long term. If a leader is incapable of drawing a hard line, or if they cannot tolerate temporary unpopularity, they're not practicing stewardship. They're just managing their own social comfort.
I love that framing. Niceness buys immediate superficial peace, but the invoice comes due later in the form of deep institutional decay.
Exactly. Stewardship pays the difficult price up front.
So if we know the traps, the anxiety, the dopamine hit of control, the false substitute of power for love, and the trap of just being nice, we can't just try to not be those things, right?
You can't just operate in a negative.
We can't just leave a void. We have to replace the possessive instinct with a proactive framework. Like, we need rules of engagement.
And that framework is built on 4 distinct obligations of holding something in trust.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the foundation here?
To set the stage for these, there is a blunt assessment from R. Scott Rodin that is highly relevant. He states, "We are stewards, not owners," and argues that the ultimate account we must give is one of obedience, not performance.
Obedience, not performance.
Right. Now, he uses a theological lens in his work, but even stripped of that, the secular application is undeniable. He is drawing a hard line between faithful obedience to a core mission versus mere performative success.
It's the difference between doing what is right for the long-term survival of the entity versus doing what artificially inflates the metrics for your annual bonus.
Spot on.
So what is the first obligation in this framework? Because I imagine it starts with what you inherit.
It does. The first active obligation is preservation.
Preservation.
A steward must possess the discernment to know which fragile traditions, which ethical standards, and which core truths must never be surrendered to the pressure of the moment.
So you have to keep everything the same.
No. This doesn't mean everything you inherit is sacred. A lot of inherited tradition is just dead weight. But a steward recognizes the living inheritance, the DNA, that actually protects the institution from losing its identity.
But how do you actually parse that out? Look at the tech industry, for example.
Oh, yeah.
The entire mantra there is move fast and break things. Disruption is practically a religion.
It really is.
So if a new leader comes in and says, hey guys, we need to preserve our core traditions, they're going to get laughed out of the boardroom and called a dinosaur.
Probably, yeah.
So how does a leader tell the difference between a legacy process that needs to be killed and a living inheritance that has to be protected?
That tension is the razor's edge of leadership. A possessive leader will cut things simply to prove they have the knife.
Prove they have the knife. Wow.
Yeah, they want to leave their unique disruptive imprint so everyone knows they were there. But a steward operates differently. They ask, what makes this institution truthful to its original purpose?
So they aren't afraid of change, they just vet it differently.
Exactly. They will happily tear down an outdated software system or restructure a bloated department, but they will fiercely preserve the underlying philosophy that built customer trust in the first place. They refuse to throw out a deep foundational root just because they want to build a flashy new roof.
It's fidelity to the mission versus vanity of the leader. Okay, so once you know what you are preserving, what comes next?
The second obligation is protection, and this is far more active than preservation. Protection means you are intentionally standing between the entrusted good and the forces that want to exploit it. In practical terms, this often means having the courage to say no to highly lucrative opportunities if those opportunities require you to compromise the core mission.
Wait, give me an example of that? Because turning down money or growth goes against every single capitalist reflex we have.
Okay, imagine a fiercely independent media outlet. They built their entire reputation on unbiased, hard-hitting, investigative journalism.
Right.
But they are struggling financially. Then, A massive corporate conglomerate offers to buy them out, promising infinite funding and a huge salary bump for the editor-in-chief.
This is like a dream.
But the catch is that the conglomerate occasionally dictates which stories get killed to protect their other business interests.
Ah, there's the poison pill.
Right. A possessive leader takes the deal, pointing to the financial success and the expanded reach as justification. But a steward leader rejects the deal, knowing that the influx of cash will fundamentally corrupt the very thing they were entrusted to protect. Protection is agonizing because it usually looks like you are failing to maximize growth.
That is heavy. You have to be willing to look like a fool to the outside world to protect the inside reality.
Yes.
And I imagine you can't just play defense forever. You have to actually move the ball forward at some point.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third obligation, improvement.
Improvement. Okay.
Stewardship is not running a museum. You cannot just polish the artifacts and keep the dust off. The steward must repair, modernize, and expand.
So they do drive growth.
They do, but the critical difference is the motive behind the improvement. The possessor asks, how can I launch a new initiative that gets my name in the press? The steward asks, how can I reinforce this structure so it is capable of enduring another 50 years after I am gone?
Which perfectly sets up the final piece of the framework, I'm guessing. You improve it so you can hand it off.
Transmission. This is the ultimate proof of stewardship. It is inherently future-facing.
Passing the baton.
Yes. A steward must hand the institution on safely to the next generation. This requires a deep, abiding commitment to institutional memory, to succession planning, and to developing younger leaders.
Which means it's not about you anymore.
Right. If you win brilliantly in the present, if you hit every metric and crush the competition, but you leave absolutely nothing durable behind for your successor, if the team is burned out and the resources are depleted, you have completely failed as a steward.
And doing all four of those, preservation, protection, improvement, and transmission, it requires a muscle that I think most modern leaders have completely atrophied.
What muscle is that?
The concept of relinquishment.
Yes, relinquishment. It is arguably the most countercultural, painful, and necessary daily practice a leader can adopt.
Why is it so painful?
Because we spend our entire careers learning how to accumulate responsibility. We learn how to expand our territory, how to hold tighter. We almost never train leaders in the discipline of release.
Because releasing feels identical to losing. If I give up control, I feel like I'm becoming less important.
Naturally.
But this isn't just about the grand finale, right? Relinquishment isn't just the speech you give at your retirement dinner when you officially pass the baton. It has to happen on, like, a random Tuesday in October.
It is entirely a daily practice. If you do not practice micro-relinquishments while you hold the maximum authority, you will be utterly incapable of a macro-relinquishment when it is finally time to transition.
So what does a micro-relinquishment look like in the real world?
Daily relinquishment looks like actively giving away the credit when a massive project succeeds, instead of standing in the center of the applause.
Deflecting the spotlight.
Yes. It looks like intentionally stepping out of the decision-making loop on a project you know your team can handle, even though you'd really enjoy being involved.
Because it strokes your ego to be needed.
Exactly. It is the conscious, repeated denial of the desperate, addictive need to be the essential hub of every single wheel in the company.
It's weaning the company off of your own ego. If you don't do that, you end up suffocating the institution. The leader becomes this massive oak tree whose canopy is so thick that no sunlight can reach the forest floor and nothing new can grow underneath them.
That is exactly what happens. They cling to power. They never train themselves to surrender interpretive control, and so they create a barren ecosystem around them.
That word, ecosystem, perfectly transitions us to the next layer of this. We've been looking very closely at the internal psychology of the leader, the ego, the anxiety, the relinquishment.
The internal struggle, yeah.
But leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. You aren't just stewarding your own soul. You are interfacing with this massive, complex, often faceless entity called the institution.
Right. It's a collective of hundreds or thousands of people.
So how does a single steward actually interface with a massive structure without getting swallowed by it?
This is where we have to look at how organizational theory approaches human motivation. There's a classic framework developed by theorists Davis, Schoorman, and Donaldson that challenges a very cynical, prevailing assumption in business.
Cynical assumption. Which one?
The assumption, often called agency theory, essentially argues that all human beings are endlessly, unavoidably driven by narrow, rational self-interest.
Oh, yeah.
It assumes every employee and every leader is just trying to maximize their personal gain at the expense of everyone else.
And therefore, you need massive compliance structures, punishments, and financial incentives to keep them in line. Is the everyone is fundamentally selfish model of management.
Exactly. And if that is entirely true, then stewardship is just a naive fantasy. It's just poetic wishing.
But they push back on that.
Yes. Davis, Schoorman, and Donaldson argue that this is scientifically and psychologically incomplete. They map out how a leader can genuinely orient their motives toward the collective good.
So humans aren't just broody robots.
Right. They demonstrate that humans possess the capacity to align their personal satisfaction with the flourishing of the entire group. A leader can actually derive their primary psychological reward not from extracting wealth, but from seeing the institution thrive as a holistic community.
And to ground that academic theory into something we can visualize, I want to bring in Wendell Berry from the text.
Wendell Berry's concept of institutional ecology is the perfect lens for this.
He's an agrarian thinker, right?
He is.
Okay.
And he warns constantly about the mindset of those who, in his words, own the world outright for money. He draws a sharp distinction between an extractive mindset and a nourishing mindset.
Extractive versus nourishing.
Right. A possessive leader looks at a company or a team like a strip mine.
Like a strip mine.
They ask, how much can I extract from this? How much labor, how many late nights, how much uncompensated loyalty, how much PR value can I pull out of the ground before it collapses?
Just ripping the resources out, whereas the steward looks at the exact same company like a farmer looking at an orchard. They ask, what does this soil actually need to yield fruit for the next 3 decades? What replenishes the trust here? How do we rotate the crops so people don't burn out? It's the difference between mining and farming.
And what's fascinating here is how the company actually feels on a daily basis, depending on which mindset is running it. I often point out that healthy steward-led institutions are frequently much less dramatic than unhealthy ones.
Less traumatic. Wait, I feel like we equate high drama with high passion. Like, if people aren't running around with their hair on fire, do they even care?
It's a common misconception.
I always think of the charismatic, possessive leader as providing a massive sugar rush to a company. You know, the board brings in this highly intense, magnetic personality, and suddenly there's a huge spike in energy.
Oh, I know the type.
The stock pops, everyone is working 80-hour weeks, the Slack channels are firing at midnight, and it feels electric.
But it's a refined carbohydrate.
Yes, it's not sustainable nutrition. Eventually, the sugar crash hits. The company becomes brittle, exhausted, and completely dependent on the next synthetic fix of that leader's motivational speeches.
That is incredibly accurate. In a possessive culture, the charismatic leader operates as the sun, and the entire solar system has to orbit their emotional state.
Their mood dictates everything.
If the leader is angry, the whole company is terrified. If the leader is happy, everyone is euphoric. The emotional intensity is exhausting.
It sounds exhausting.
But in a steward-led culture, the trust is much thicker. The shared maturity is higher. The responsibility is distributed. Therefore, it doesn't need to be as loud. It doesn't rely on the theatrical, performative unity centered on one figurehead.
So take me down to the ground floor. What does the actual day-to-day machinery of a steward-led ecology look like? Let's take something mundane, like a Tuesday afternoon status meeting.
Okay, good example.
How does a steward run a meeting differently than an owner?
The difference in a meeting is palpable. In a possessive culture, meetings are essentially staged theater, designed to ratify the leader's pre-existing will.
Stage theater, so the decision is already made.
Exactly. The leader already knows what they want to do. The meeting is just a ritual where subordinates perform emotional loyalty, validate the leader's brilliance, and agree with the plan. Genuine dissent is viewed as insubordination.
Oh man, I have been in those meetings. You sit there trying to read the boss's mood, calculating exactly how to phrase a minor concern so it sounds like a compliment. It's exhausting.
But in a steward-led institution, meetings have a totally different function. Meetings are explicitly designed for bringing reality into the room.
Bringing reality in?
They are the mechanisms for truth-telling. People are allowed and expected to name systemic problems, point out flawed logic, and bring bad news to the table without fear that it will be seen as an act of treason.
Which implies a totally different flow of information. How does hard news travel in a healthy ecology?
It travels upward, quickly, and without disguise.
Right out of disguise.
Right. In a toxic culture, bad news gets heavily massaged and sugar-coated at every level of management. So by the time it reaches the CEO, A massive crisis sounds like a minor hiccup.
We just have a slight optimization issue when really the servers are melting.
Exactly. In a steward culture, hard truth travels up efficiently. And conversely, credit is distributed outward and downward, while blame is absorbed upward by the leadership.
Blame goes up, credit goes down.
Yes. This is Robert Greenleaf's famous servant-first concept, applied structurally, not just as an attitude. The institution is not a stage built to highlight the leader's importance. The institution is a community of purpose that the leader is structurally subordinating themselves to strengthen.
Okay, I am tracking with you entirely. Letting hard news travel upward, absorbing blame, passing out credit, that all makes perfect sense when the skies are clear.
When things are easy, sure.
When the economy is booming, when profits are up 20%, when the team is well rested, everyone can afford to be generous and collaborative.
Yep.
But what happens when the sky falls? What happens when the institution faces a sudden, massive existential threat? Because it's easy to be a steward in peacetime.
You are hitting on the ultimate pressure test. Pressure is the great, undeniable revealer of character.
It really is.
Under normal, sunny conditions, anyone can memorize the vocabulary of stewardship. It sounds great on a LinkedIn post. But crisis is pedagogical.
Pedagogical, it teaches you.
It teaches the entire institution what the leader genuinely believes about their power in their absolute core.
Because when the survival of the company is on the line, the temptation to view that extreme urgency as a permission slip to take total possession must be overwhelming.
It is almost irresistible. Nouwen's warning that power substitutes for love becomes violently magnified under stress.
Because you're scared.
When the walls are closing in, human biology takes over. The leader feels immense fear. They desperately crave certainty, immediate resolution, and total, unquestioning alignment from their team.
There's no time for a group hug.
Right. Suddenly, the slow process of shared discernment looks like a fatal weakness. Listening to multiple perspectives takes too much time. So the leader reflexively centralizes all control.
They pull it all inward.
They begin to infantilize their subordinates, treating senior vice presidents like errand runners in the name of speed. They hoard critical information because holding the cards gives them a sense of leverage and safety.
And what happens to the distribution of blame and credit when the building is literally on fire? Does that flip too?
It flips instantly. The possessive leader under pressure will ruthlessly hoard any scrap of credit for minor wins to prove they are managing the crisis well.
And the blame.
They will immediately disperse blame downward to protect their own image from the fallout. The steward leader, however, does the exact opposite.
Really? Even in a panic?
Even when they are privately terrified, the steward absorbs the blame upward, standing as a shield for the team against the board or the press, and they disperse whatever meager credit exists downward to keep morale from shattering.
Okay, I have to challenge you on this. Because I can hear the pragmatists listening to this screaming at their speakers right now.
Bring it on.
Let's create a real scenario. Imagine a massive PR disaster breaks on social media. The stock is plummeting by the minute. If you don't act, the company could literally be bankrupt in 48 hours.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. In that specific emergency, don't you need a dictator? Doesn't shared discernment literally take too much time?
I see where you're going.
Like, you cannot sit around in a circle holding hands, asking what the institutional ecology needs when the house is burning down. You need someone to grab the wheel and yank it hard.
That is the most common and vital pushback, and the framework addresses it directly.
Ow.
Stewardship absolutely does not forbid decisive, unilateral, swift action in a crisis.
Oh, it doesn't.
No. A steward can, and often must, act with lightning speed. They will close off options, hold a hard line, bypass standard committee protocols, and make agonizing unilateral choices to stop the bleeding. Stewardship is not a suicide pact with process.
Okay, so if the steward is acting unilaterally and the dictator is acting unilaterally, what is the actual difference between them in that 48-hour window?
The difference is entirely internal during the crisis, but it dictates the entire survival of the culture in the aftermath.
Internal? How?
The dictator uses the emergency as an opportunity to permanently alter the power dynamic, to serve their own ego. They use the crisis to prove, once and for all, that they are the sole savior, essentially telling the company, see, you would be dead without me.
Wow. They weaponize the crisis.
They turn the temporary crisis into permanent self-authorization.
And the steward?
Even while making the brutal unilateral call, the steward's internal compass is asking a different question. They are asking, what kind of precedent am I teaching the organization by how I handle this? What structural damage might I be doing to our culture of trust while I solve this immediate cash flow problem?
They are aware of the fallout.
Yes. They view the suspension of normal collaborative rules as a tragic, temporary necessity, not a victory.
Ugh, I see it. The dictator uses the crisis to secretly build a throne in the ashes, but the steward uses their authority to put out the fire, but fully intends to hand the fire extinguisher back to the team the second the smoke clears.
Precisely. If the leader views the company as a trust, crisis calls forth a more severe disciplined responsibility. If they view it as a possession, crisis simply authorizes a more naked, aggressive ownership.
And here's the really dangerous part. What happens if a leader fails that pressure test? Or worse, what if there isn't a massive crisis, but the leader just slowly, over 5 or 10 years, succumbs to the daily grinding friction of leadership?
That's the insidious part.
Right, a metamorphosis happens, and it's not loud. It is a quiet, highly camouflaged decay. Let's look at how custodians mutate into owners.
This decay is perhaps the most insidious dynamic we study because the collapse of stewardship rarely comes with a cinematic evil monologue.
Right, a CEO doesn't stand up at the annual retreat and announce, I am now consuming this institution for my own personal glory, thank you very much.
No, the mutation is heavily camouflaged. It is cloaked in deeply moral, highly sophisticated language.
So how do you spot it? If I am looking at my own leadership or evaluating my boss, what are the symptoms that the mutation has occurred?
The text outlines 4 highly reliable signs that possessive leadership has taken root. The first sign is the conflation of loyalty.
Conflation of loyalty. Meaning what?
The leader begins confusing loyalty to the core mission with loyalty to their specific personality.
So the mission and the ego become a tangled knot.
Yes. The leader begins to expect people not just to do the work well, but to constantly validate the leader's central, heroic place in the narrative. And the danger here is how dissent is handled.
How so?
In a healthy culture, dissent is a strategic disagreement. In a mutated culture, dissent is interpreted psychologically as a personal betrayal.
So if I'm an analyst and I say, hey, I looked at the data and I think this new marketing strategy is severely flawed, the leader doesn't hear critique of the strategy.
Exactly. They hear, you do not trust my vision, you are not on my team.
And that's toxic.
Gratitude is no longer an organic emotion. It becomes a political currency that you must constantly pay up to the leader to remain in their good graces.
Okay, what's the second sign?
The second sign of the mutation is the active resistance to genuine succession.
Which stems directly from the fear of irrelevance we talked about earlier.
It does. The possessive leader ensures that the institution remains entirely dependent on their own interpretive center.
But they usually talk a big game about mentorship, right?
Oh, they might talk warmly in public about mentorship. They might have leadership development programs, but they ensure that no truly independent, capable successor ever actually emerges.
They sabotage it.
They consolidate the key client relationships, the institutional knowledge, and the symbolic legitimacy so tightly into their own hands that if they were to get hit by a bus, the institution would genuinely fracture.
Which, to their ego, feels like ultimate efficiency. Look how vital I am. But structurally, it is just engineered malicious dependency. What is the third sign?
The third sign is the consumption of trust. Because the possessive leader absolutely cannot tolerate being decentered or challenged, the truth inevitably have to be managed.
Managed truth.
Yes. The culture becomes highly performative. Employees are incredibly smart. They quickly learn exactly what realities can be spoken out loud, what hard truths must be softened with euphemisms, and what data must be buried entirely.
It creates a culture of nodding heads and silent panic. Outward agreement, concealing deep inward caution.
Yes, and that leads to the fourth sign, mistaking extraction for excellence.
Extraction for
The
excellence.
mutated leader continually demands more. More output, higher margins, more visibility, more weekend emails, more personal sacrifice from their team. But they invest almost zero energy or resources into the replenishment or the future condition of the people actually carrying the load.
It's like burning the antique furniture to keep the house warm and congratulating yourself on building a brilliantly hot fire.
That's a great metaphor.
The metric looks great, but the capital is being destroyed.
Yeah.
But I want to ask about how this feels for the people on the ground.
Okay.
Because if you are the employee sitting in the cubicle or the junior partner at the firm, navigating this is incredibly confusing, especially when the leader uses what is called false humility.
False humility is the worst.
How do you spot the leader who uses all the right modest language, who constantly talks about the team and servant leadership, but structurally, they are a tyrant.
False humility is the most deceptive, frustrating form of anti-stewardship to work under. The leader sounds incredibly humble.
Right, they read the books.
They might reject the massive corner office, they wear casual clothes, they eat in the cafeteria, and they aggressively use the vocabulary of service. They constantly say things like, "I'm just here to support you all."
Right.
But if you look at the actual organizational structure, no genuine transfer of authority ever occurs.
Ah, the aesthetics are democratic, but the plumbing is autocratic.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. Every important piece of meaning, every budget allocation, every final strategic decision still has to pass through their personal interpretation to be valid. No independent center of thought or power is allowed to mature anywhere else in the building.
And that creates this intense moral fog for the employees. I've had friends in these environments, and they always feel crazy. They feel guilty for being exhausted or for wanting to quit because the leader has hijacked the vocabulary of virtue.
It is deeply crazy-making. I mean, how do you lodge a formal complaint against a leader who constantly reminds you how much sleep they're losing to serve the team?
You can't. You look like the ungrateful one.
In these environments, psychological euphemisms take over. Deep, unhealthy dependency on the leader is rebranded as loyalty.
Wow.
The ambient fear of displeasing the boss is renamed as strategic alignment. Eventually, the institution totally loses its ability to tell the objective truth about its own sickness.
Because telling the truth would destabilize the leader's narrative of control. That is chilling. But it inevitably leads us to the ultimate, inescapable reality that every single person holding power has to face.
The end of the line.
Right. No matter how brilliantly you centralize control, no matter how much you manipulate the narrative or how indispensable you make yourself, eventually the clock runs out.
It always does.
You have to leave. Whether it is by retirement, resignation, losing an election, or simply mortality, you will leave. Which brings us to the final reality. The discipline of leaving things better and what actually remains.
This is where the true, unforgiving metric of success is finally defined. When we talk about a leader's legacy in the context of steward leadership, we have to completely discard the normal definitions.
What are the normal definitions?
Well, normally, legacy is reputation. It is how fondly you are remembered at the annual gala. It is how many buildings or scholarships have your name plastered on them.
Right, statues and plaques.
But in stewardship, legacy is strictly defined as the condition in which the entrusted good is left.
The condition of what remains when your shadow is gone.
Yes. We have to reevaluate Robert Greenleaf's servant-first concept through this specific lens. The ultimate historical judgment of your leadership isn't whether you remained central, vibrant, and indispensable right up until your final day in office.
What is the judgment then?
The true judgment is evaluating the people you led after you depart. Were they served into greater dignity, resilience, and independent strength? Did your presence cultivate their maturity, or did it stunt their growth? Was the institution itself served into greater truthfulness and durability?
If we pull back the lens and connect this to the biggest possible picture, we aren't just talking about management theory anymore.
No, we are talking about human nature.
Fundamentally, this is about human anthropology. It is about how we understand our place in the universe.
Exactly. We are, at our core, creatures and receivers. We are not ultimate sovereigns.
Which hurts the ego to admit.
It does. But no matter how much wealth we build, we are not self-made, and we are not entitled to permanently own everything our hands can grasp. Steward leadership is essentially a rigorous moral discipline against the idolatry of the self.
Idolatry of the self, that's powerful.
It is the profound recognition that we inherit life, we inherit resources, and we inherit responsibility. And our sole sacred job is to care for it, improve it, and pass it on safely.
It reminds me of that beautiful ancient proverb about planting a tree whose shade you know you will never sit in.
That's the essence of it.
That requires a totally different motivation. You have to act, expend energy, and care deeply for a future that you will never control and a benefit you will never personally enjoy.
Wendell Berry has a line that captures this perfectly. He says, "Be joyful though you have considered all the facts."
Oh, I love that.
It is the choice to care, to build, and to steward, despite knowing the harsh facts, knowing how easily institutions decay, how quickly successors can ruin your work, and how rapidly people forget your name.
It is faithfulness under full knowledge of human frailty.
And to make that high-minded faithfulness highly practical, the insights we are exploring culminate in an appendix called A Rule of Life. a set of daily disciplines to keep the ego in check.
Let's get into that. I want to synthesize a few of those daily practices right now because I want everyone listening to have something highly practical, like a mental tool they can take into the office tomorrow morning.
Let's do it.
One of the rules is about the sequence of questions you ask. Rule 2, I think.
Yes, the discipline is to ask the stewardship question before you ever ask the strategy question.
Okay, play that out for me.
In standard business, a crisis hits or an opportunity arises, and the first question is, what will work? What is the most efficient, ruthless way to win this deal?
Right. Pragmatism first.
The steward discipline forces you to pause and ask, before we figure out what works, what form of action is actually faithful to the core identity we are holding in trust?
It forces moral integrity ahead of mere pragmatism.
Exactly. If you win the deal but destroy your integrity, you haven't stewarded the trust, you've traded it.
I love that. Sequence matters. Strategy serves stewardship, not the other way around. Another crucial practice, Rule 4, hits directly on the succession issue. It is the mandate to build successors early.
Yes. It explicitly requires you to intentionally refuse the emotional comfort of indispensability.
Which is incredibly hard because indispensability feels like job security.
Oh, it's the ultimate safety blanket. But the discipline requires you to start giving away your specialized knowledge, training your replacements, and exposing your team to the board or the clients years before you plan to leave. You have to develop other people before the transition becomes a forced emergency.
And to do that, you have to be highly self-aware, which ties into another daily rule, Rule 5, protecting upward truth.
Right. A steward must proactively construct systems that make it easier for harsh reality to reach them than for flattering images to reach them.
Because institutions rot from the inside out when leaders become too emotionally fragile, right?
Exactly. Or too defensive, or too chronically angry to be told the unvarnished truth. You have to actively reward the person who brings you the bad news, even if it ruins your afternoon.
Because the friction of reality is the only thing that keeps you grounded. And then there is the final discipline we'll cover, Rule 9, which is perhaps the hardest one to execute daily. Keeping one active, ongoing practice of relinquishment.
This one is vital. You have to find a way to regularly give away something that you legitimately have the power and the right to keep.
Like what? Give me some examples.
It might be giving away the public credit for a major high-visibility win. Let someone else give the presentation. It might be quietly delegating your decision rights on a pet project that you really enjoy tinkering with.
Just stepping back.
Or it might simply be choosing to remain silent in the first 20 minutes of a brainstorming meeting, giving up your symbolic centrality so junior staff can speak first.
This isn't just about empowering them, is it?
No, it is about training your own neurobiology. Renunciation trains the internal muscle of non-ownership.
It continually reminds your ego that the office is not you. You are a person holding a role. You are not the role.
Exactly.
So as we pull all these threads together, the grand takeaway here is that steward leadership is not some weak, passive, watered-down version of authority.
Not at all. It is not powerless.
In reality, it is the absolute most demanding, heaviest, most psychologically rigorous exercise of power there is, and it's the hardest precisely because it requires the daily, unending discipline to hold massive authority without treating it as your personal property.
It is carrying the immense weight of the crown while actively refusing to claim the deed to the kingdom.
And the beautiful paradox is that while it is a severe discipline, it is also incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, it releases the leader from the impossible, crushing burden of acting as though the entire universe and the institution's very existence relies entirely on their personal perfection. When you know you are just a temporary custodian, you can lead with intense passion, but you can also sleep at night.
That is the ultimate freedom.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over as you close out this deep dive and head back into your real life.
Something to chew on.
Think specifically about the domain you oversee right now. It could be a massive division at a Fortune 500 company, it could be a small startup you founded, or it could simply be the dynamics of your own household.
Anywhere you hold power.
If you were instantly removed from that role tonight and someone else were to inherit your exact responsibilities tomorrow morning, what condition would they find things in? What hidden emotional debts, what unspoken dependencies, or what entirely depleted human resources would they uncover when they looked under the hood?
Are you currently spending your daily energy building a brilliant monument to yourself?
Or are you quietly, diligently preparing the rich soil for whoever comes next?
That is the exact measuring line of a true steward.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these concepts, test them against your own reflexes this week, and watch how power moves in the rooms you enter. We will catch you next time.